They say you can measure the weight of love by the number of seats set at a table. I counted mine that night. 0. The china was laid out with precision gold-rimmed plates sitting atop embroidered linen. A chandelier above cast soft light onto a spread that screamed legacy duck confit herbed potatoes, crystal flutes. It was my father's 75th birthday, and it would be his last. I arrived 5 minutes early. My heels clicked against the marble entryway, a sound that once announced my presence with pride. This time, no one looked up. No one even paused. My cousin Julian was talking loudly about his new hedge fund. Aunt Margaret clinked her glass and said, "Don't mention stock's father's blood pressure." My sister Paige leaned across the table, her laugh too polished, too deliberate. And my brother Scott. He didn't even glance in my direction. He just kept cutting his steak like it was a business negotiation. There was no chair for me, no name card, not even a place setting. It was deliberate, surgical, cruel in that quiet, aristocratic way our family had perfected. Never say it out loud. Just let the absent scream. I stood there for a beat too long. Then quietly, I pulled a chair from the corner, one that didn't match, and sat at the very end of the table like a child at the adults' feast. My mother gave me a glance. Not angry, not welcoming, just acknowledgement. As if I were a distant relative they were too polite to ask to leave. No one asked what I'd been up to. No one asked how my job was. No one mentioned law school. Not even my title. Attorney Rhodes. 3 years of night school while working 2 jobs. Bar exam passed on the first try. A quiet rise through a small but respected firm. But here I was, still just the daughter who didn't marry rich. Still the black coffee instead of champagne. When the server brought out the wine, she skipped me. "I don't drink," I said gently. The waiter smiled and leaned in. "Your mother said not to serve you anything." I nodded. So, that's how it was. The toast came, of course. Paige stood first, glass raised, her voice sweet as the wine they all drank. "To our father, the man who taught us the value of legacy, of loyalty, of protecting the family name." The family name. I almost laughed, because the truth was I'd protected it more than any of them had. Quietly, legally, without fanfare or demand. But I wasn't the golden one. I wasn't the investment. I was the insurance they never claimed. After the toast, Father looked up, finally looked at me. "I'm glad you could come," he said, then added, "But you don't have to stay." It wasn't rude, not even cold. It was clinical. A statement of fact. "I know," I replied softly. "I just wanted to see you one last time." He looked down at his plate. I don't know if he flinched, but I saw his hand tremble when he reached for the knife. After dinner, while everyone gathered in the library, the lawyer arrived. Mr. Denholm, old family counsel, his suit, crisp, briefcase in hand. "Father wanted the will read tonight," he said. Privately. I didn't ask why. I knew why. He was already fading, his memory skipping like a worn record. There were days he thought Paige was my mother. Days he called me by the dog's name. I stood just outside the door as they filed in. The double doors closed. A click echoed through the hallway, and I stayed in the hall. No one called me in. Not even Denholm. 37 minutes passed. Then the doors opened again. Faces walked out, some satisfied, some stunned. Paige looked triumphant. Scott looked smug. No one looked at me. Until Denholm did. He approached me with a soft frown. "I'm sorry, Miss Rhodes," he said. "Your name wasn't in the will." I looked at him. Really looked. The man who'd known me since I was 10. The man who once told me I had my mother's mind but my father's stubbornness, and now he couldn't meet my gaze. I gave him a small smile. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me to my face." He nodded, then stepped away. I stood alone in that marble corridor surrounded by oil paintings of men with cold eyes and heavy frames. They had written me out, but what they didn't know was that the ink wasn't dry. Not yet. I don't know exactly when the erasure began, but I remember when I first noticed it. It was Christmas 2 years before the will. I'd flown home from Boston 12 hours, delayed, exhausted, carrying 2 suitcases and a bottle of Glenlivet for Father because I still thought small offerings could buy me entry. The house hadn't changed, grand cold echoing with pride more than warmth. But something had changed. The hallway wall, the one with the family photo collage, was different. I stood in front of it, blinking. My college graduation photo gone. The photo of me in mock trial as a teenager gone. The framed newspaper clipping local law student wins justice for foster kids, the one Father used to brag about at country club dinners, gone. In their place were polished pictures of Scott and Paige, her at a gala in Monaco, him shaking hands with a senator. Even my cousins had more presence than I did. I stared at the wall like it had betrayed me, like maybe if I stared long enough a photo might materialize. "Don't dwell," my mother had said, walking past me. "You chose your path." That was her mantra. You chose this. You walked away. You left the family. But that wasn't true. I never left. I was pushed. When I turned 25, I left the firm Father tried to funnel me into a white shoe corporate machine that only valued last names and golf handicaps. I joined a nonprofit legal center instead, focused on domestic abuse survivors. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't lucrative. But it was real. That was the first fracture. He told me over dinner that I'd embarrassed him, that helping broken women wasn't law, it was charity, that I was wasting my potential, that I was wasting his name. So I stopped using it. On my cards, on my LinkedIn, even at the office, I went by my mother's maiden name. Not as revenge, but as release. I never stopped being his daughter, but I stopped asking for his applause. I thought that was maturity. Turns out it was ammunition. The erasure crept in quiet and deliberate. It wasn't just the photos. It was the estate newsletter sent to donors and alumni listing Paige as the only daughter. It was Scott's biography in the Family Foundation brochure listing him as the sole heir. It was the conversations at events where old family friends would tilt their heads and say, "And remind me you're the cousin." Right? No. Not the cousin. Just edited. Sometimes erasure isn't loud. It doesn't storm in and declare you dead. It whispers that you were never there. And that's worse. Because how do you argue with silence? The final blow came 6 months before Father's death. A gala. A fundraiser. Black tie. Paige's idea. I'd received a generic invite. No name, no title, no seat assignment. But I went. Because somewhere inside me I still believed showing up mattered. Paige stood on stage, her voice sweet and calculated. She was announcing the family's new initiative, a legal fellowship program in honor of Father's legacy in law. And then she said it. "We believe in uplifting young attorneys who, like my father, understand that law is about legacy and honor, not loud causes or personal agendas." A pause, then applause. I sat frozen, the champagne flute trembling slightly in my hand. That wasn't just shade. That was war. I looked up and saw my mother watching me from across the room. Not in guilt, not in sorrow, but in satisfaction. And that's when I knew they weren't just leaving me out of the legacy. They were rewriting it without me in it. Later that night, I found an old family scrapbook hidden in the attic guest room. I flipped through pages of birthdays, holidays, milestones. Every mention of me was cropped, scribbled over, or mysteriously lost. In one corner, a torn photo had been sloppily glued, a note written in familiar cursive underneath it. Too emotional, too difficult, always questioning. That was my mother's handwriting. I left the next morning without saying goodbye, and I told myself it didn't matter, that the will The money, the name, none of it mattered. That I had carved a place for myself in the world without them. But when Denholm said you weren't in the will, something cracked. Not because I wanted the money, not because I wanted a seat at the table, but because they had pretended I never built one of my own. I wasn't grieving an inheritance. I was grieving a version of myself they refused to acknowledge ever existed. That night, I sat in my apartment in D.C., surrounded by files and client notes, and stared at the ceiling. The erasure was almost complete. Almost. But not yet. Because I still had the one thing they didn't expect, the law. And I was going to use it. I didn't plan on going back to the house. But grief has a strange way of rewriting boundaries, of softening locks that once seemed impenetrable. Father had been gone 3 weeks. The obituary made front-page news in the legal journals. R. Lionel Rhodes, a pillar of justice. It made no mention of me. I didn't expect it to. But I needed something. Closure, maybe. Proof that I hadn't imagined it all. So I called Emily. Emily wasn't family by blood. She was our housekeeper for 25 years, but more of a mother to me than the woman who gave birth to me ever was. She picked up on the second ring. "Come tomorrow," she said, "when the house is empty." I arrived at 6:45 a.m., dressed in gray slacks, a blazer, and flat shoes, the kind of outfit no one noticed. Emily met me at the side entrance. She didn't hug me. She simply placed a warm hand on my shoulder and whispered, "The study. 3rd drawer. You'll know which one." I moved through the house like a shadow, each step echoing softly on the hardwood. The portraits on the wall still hung there, still pristine. None of them included me. But the study was untouched, Father's sanctuary. The air smelled like mahogany, leather, and paper. It always did. The desk was as I remembered, meticulous. No dust, no clutter. Everything had a place. I walked around it and knelt down, pulling the 3rd drawer. It stuck for a moment like it didn't want to be opened. Then it slid free with a soft groan. Inside there was a folder, plain manila. No label. Beneath it, a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in his unmistakable handwriting, bold, deliberate, curved at the edges like a man used to courtroom signatures. Natalie. I sat on the carpet, folder on my lap, and opened the letter first. March 3rd, 2021, Natalie. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means they didn't tell you the truth. I never intended to cut you from the will. That was not my instruction. But intentions, as you know, are rarely worth the ink they're written in, not in this family. You chose a path I never understood. And I punished you for that in my silence, but not in my decisions. I left you something, not money. Something more powerful. Something only you can wield. Go to Denholm's office. Tell him about the Redford clause. He'll know what it means. It's your turn now. I'm sorry I didn't say this when I should have. Love, Dad. My chest tightened. Not from grief. Not yet. But from anger that pressed behind my ribs like a scream that had waited too long. He had tried. He had meant to include me. But someone had stopped him. I opened the manila folder. Inside, a copy of a draft will signed but never notarized. My name was there, listed as secondary executor. A file marked Red Rhodes, private. And another envelope, heavier, sealed with wax. I opened the file first. It was a trust formation, new, not yet filed. A legal vehicle to hold legacy assets, charitable funds, and most notably, the naming rights to a law fellowship established in Father's name. My name was all over it. As creator, as controlling officer, as trustee. But the draft had never been processed. In the margins were notes in red pen. "To public page will object. Scott not aware." I stared at those notes for a long time. He had tried to include me, but someone had gotten to him before the ink could dry. I took a photo of every page, then opened the wax-sealed envelope. Inside was a single-page document printed in legal format. Addendum to Last Will and Testament authorizing Natalie Rhodes as legal executor of the Rhodes Fellowship Trust, dated 3 months before his death, signed by my father. No witness. That was the loophole. No witness meant no legal weight. But the signature was real. The intent was clear. And I had it. I placed everything back neatly. Left the letter, took the files. Before I left, I looked around the study one last time. His books, his framed degrees, his gavel. He'd built an empire of law and legacy. And when he tried finally to pass a part of it to me, someone had intervened. I thanked Emily quietly, then stepped back out into the cold. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scream. I drove straight to Denholm's office. His assistant nearly dropped her clipboard when I said, "Tell him I know about the Redford clause." She returned 5 minutes later, pale. "He'll see you now." Denholm stood as I entered. He looked older than I remembered. He didn't smile. "Where did you hear that term?" he asked. I placed the folder gently on his desk. "My father," I said. Posthumously. He looked down, opened the folder. His eyes widened just slightly. Then he exhaled, sat down and said, "Well, I suppose it's time someone told the truth." Denholm called the meeting. Not me. That part matters. Because when your family has painted you as irrelevant, the only thing more threatening than your presence is someone else's recognition of your worth. The invitation came in a cream envelope, formal, official. A post-estate clarification session, held at the firm's downtown office. No brunch, no flowers, no eulogies. Just law. I arrived 10 minutes early. Power suit, low heels, hair tied back. They were already there. Mother poised in her high-neck blouse and widow's pearls. Paige dressed like a magazine, spread, too polished, too unaware. Scott leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, trying to radiate control. They didn't stand when I entered. They didn't even blink. But I saw the twitch in Paige's jaw, the way Mother's hand tightened around her clutch. They weren't expecting me to look like this. They expected silence, grief, or shame. But I brought none of that. Denholm entered and nodded to me, then turned to the rest. "I've asked you all here for clarification regarding Mr. Rhodes's estate, specifically the components related to the Redford clause." Scott frowned. "What clause?" Paige rolled her eyes. "Dad already signed the final will. What's the point of digging up scraps?" Denholm didn't flinch. "Actually," he said, "Mr. Rhodes signed an addendum. One that includes a trust formation naming Miss Rhodes." He nodded toward me as the legal executor of the Rhodes Fellowship. Mother blinked. Paige sat straighter. "No," Paige said. "That's not possible. He told us what he told you." I interrupted calmly, "Was what you wanted to hear. What he tried to give me is what you worked to erase." Scott scoffed. "Oh, come on. You were gone for years. You didn't even visit him during his last surgery." "He wasn't told I visited," I said. "I sat in the hallway for 3 hours while he slept. The nurse had to ask me to leave quietly. Guess who told her I wasn't allowed in the room? Their silence was confirmation." I continued. "None of you expected me to find the letter, or the original draft, or the trust documents. But I did." Denholm opened the folder and slid copies onto the table. The signature glowed beneath the light. My father's. The air shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. Paige leaned forward. He changed his mind. "That's why the final version omitted her." "No," Denholm said. "He changed his lawyers. And when he realized certain terms had been removed without his clear consent, he drafted the addendum himself." "He didn't file it," Mother said sharply. "So it's meaningless." Denholm turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" I nodded once, then stood slowly. "When someone writes you out of a narrative," I began, voice low but resonant, "the hardest part isn't the silence, it's the doubt. You start wondering if you were ever in the story to begin with. I placed a copy of the trust on the table. He wanted to leave behind something more than money. He wanted legacy. And he knew the difference between image and impact. I looked at Paige. At the gala last year, you stood on stage and said law wasn't about personal agendas. That wasn't just shade. It was surgical. She looked away. I continued. He wrote this trust to correct that. To make sure his name supported the kind of law I practice, the kind that defends the voiceless, the kind that doesn't get champagne toasts. I turned to Denholm. Have the documents been verified? He nodded. We've confirmed the handwriting, the intent, and the chain of custody. While the original will stands for property distribution, the Rhodes Fellowship Trust exists independently. And Miss Rhodes? He looked at the others, is its sole executor. Mother's voice cracked for the first time. That trust was never meant to be public. It was a draft. A thought. Nothing more. No, I said. It was his apology. And I'm going to honor it. They didn't argue. Not loudly. Because the thing about people who build their world on appearance is that they don't know how to fight in rooms without mirrors. I picked up the file and turned to leave. Just before I reached the door, Paige called out. So what, Natalie, you win. You get to stand there and pretend like you didn't abandon him, like you were the perfect daughter. I turned slowly. No, I said. I wasn't perfect. I was principled. There's a difference. In the elevator, I breathed for the first time that hour. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was free. That night, I sat at my desk staring at the trust formation, the legal weight of it humming beneath my fingertips. It wasn't about money. It never was. It was about memory. And restoring what they tried to erase. There's a moment after a confrontation where silence doesn't feel like relief. It feels like calculation. They weren't going to fight me in that office. But I knew the real war would begin quietly behind closed doors, in private calls, in edits to digital documents. I didn't have time to wait. The next day, I went back to my firm. My boss, Marta, an ex-judge with a spine made of steel and a heart carved by justice, closed her office door behind me. You look like you just outmaneuvered a hydra, she said. I placed the folder on her desk. Marta, I need help. I need this to hold up under scrutiny. I need to make sure what I have is enough. She opened the file, read the first page, and arched one brow. Redford clause. I nodded. Her lips curled slightly. Your father was good. But this is a chess move. She flipped through each document carefully. This is real, she finally said. But if your family's smart, and they are, they'll try to contest. On the basis of mental competence, duress, maybe even procedural irregularity. I know, I said. That's why I need what's missing. She looked up. What do you think they're hiding? Everything, I said. For the next 2 weeks, I buried myself in research. I filed a formal discovery request through the estate's legal office, citing legal standing under the Redford Clause as special executor. It was an obscure move, but binding. They had to comply. 2 days later, I received a flash drive. No cover letter, no explanation. Just a courier envelope with my name scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. I plugged it into my encrypted laptop. The folders were titled Archives, Audit, and Private Denholm. Inside, I found digital scans of correspondences, emails between Paige and father's previous counsel, memos about removing unnecessary complexity, PDFs with will drafts, earlier versions where my name was present, then suddenly vanished in the next version. And most damning, a document labeled Strategy 3 PDF. It was a meeting note, not official, just typed sentences and timestamps. 9:05 a.m., Paige. She won't contest. She doesn't care about money. 9:06 a.m., Denholm. If Natalie discovers the addendum, we'll need a pretext. Early signs of cognitive decline. 9:07 a.m., Scott, we need the board to stay intact. No outsider trustees. 9:08 a.m. Page. We'll say it was never signed, or that it was a sentimental draft. My stomach dropped. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was conspiracy. I called Marta. She read the notes in silence, then said, "We bring this to court. You're not just restoring a legacy, you're exposing fraud." She paused. "But you need to be ready. Once this goes public, there's no going back. You won't just be the forgotten daughter, you'll be the one who dismantled the Rhodes name from within." I exhaled. I never wanted that. I just wanted truth. "And now truth wants you back," she said. I filed a formal motion with the probate court to reopen the will process under suspicion of undue influence and intentional suppression of legal documents. My case cited the Redford Clause, the unsigned addendum, the strategy memo, and historical digital correspondence. The court accepted the petition for review. A hearing date was set. The news leaked within 48 hours. The first article hit a small legal blog. Then a larger one picked it up. Rhodes' estate contested over missing daughter's role in legacy trust. By day 5, a national outlet ran the headline, "Forgotten heir or legal whistleblower, the Rhodes legacy now faces a battle from within." That one stung. Because I didn't want to be a whistleblower. I wanted to be a daughter who mattered. Then something strange happened. I started receiving emails. Former associates of my father, clerks, interns, even a retired judge. All of them had known. Or suspected. But none had spoken. Until now. One message stood out. He told me she was the only one who ever understood justice for its own sake. He regretted pushing her away. Another, I saw the trust file. It wasn't a draft. It was ready for submission. They shelved it. Piece by piece, the narrative shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was inconvenient. And that was far more dangerous. The final breakthrough came in a handwritten memo from one of the firm's paralegals, an anonymous package sent to my office. Inside, a scan of a signature log showing my father signing the addendum. Dated. Time-stamped. Witnessed. By the very person who had denied it ever existed. Denholm. I brought it straight to Marta. She looked at me no longer as a young attorney, but as something else. Something sharper. "We don't just have a case," she said. "We have precedent." I nodded slowly, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself the tiniest of smiles. They buried the truth. But I was the shovel. It started with a phone call. I was in the middle of reviewing affidavits when my assistant buzzed in. "There's someone online too. He says he used to clerk for Judge R. Lionel Rhodes, and he's been waiting for this day." Curious, I picked up. "Miss Rhodes?" "Yes. My name's Ethan Klein. I clerked for your father in '98. I thought you should know. He always carried your picture in his briefcase." I didn't say anything. He continued. "He never showed anyone, but I saw it once. You were wearing a navy blazer standing next to a courthouse. He told me, that's the only person in this family who understands justice the way I do." My throat tightened. Ethan cleared his voice. "I have emails, Ms. Rhodes, from Denholm. I was doing some work for the foundation last year and I kept copies. Something didn't sit right. He sent them over within the hour, and they were gold. Messages from Denholm to Page referencing controlled narratives and trustee optics. One line stood out. "We must ensure Natalie doesn't discover the draft, or she'll weaponize it legally, and she's good enough to win." I forwarded them to Marta. She called back within 5 minutes. "You're not just defending your place anymore," she said. "You're dismantling theirs." By the end of the week, I had 3 more allies. Sophia, a retired secretary who'd worked with my father for 2 decades. She mailed me a physical notebook, his daily planner. Inside, March 17th, finalized trust documents. Natalie. Marcus, a financial advisor, revealed that the Rhodes Foundation's accounts had been adjusted 3 weeks after my father's stroke transfers that rerouted funds meant for the trust. And then came the big one. Judge Eleanor Parrish. She was a legend, a trailblazer, and one of my father's closest confidants. She showed up unannounced in my office lobby. I stood up as she entered, stunned. "Don't look so surprised," she said, placing her handbag down. "Your father and I fought like gladiators, but when it came to you," he softened. She looked around. "You're building something bigger than a rebuttal, Natalie. You're building accountability. And you won't do it alone." She testified in a sworn statement that my father discussed his intention to name me executor in front of her 2 months before his death. And just like that, their version of events began to bleed. The next court session was a procedural review. The family showed up in sleek black suits, expressions rehearsed. But they weren't prepared for what came next. Marta stood and said, "Your Honor, with permission, we would like to submit new witness testimony and supplemental evidentiary material supported by corroborative parties." One by one, names they never expected were called. Ethan Klein, Sophia Barnes, Marcus Delgado, Judge Eleanor Parrish. Each testimony chipped away at their narrative. Each voice made my presence more than personal, it made it institutional. Paige shifted in her seat. Scott scowled. Mother looked tired. When Sophia was asked why she came forward after so many years, she said simply, "Because I saw how hard Natalie tried to belong. And I saw how hard they worked to make sure she didn't." The judge nodded. Outside the courtroom, press waited. Microphones, flashbulbs, a world I had once watched from a distance. They asked me questions about the will, about legacy, about betrayal. I gave them only one answer. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here for restoration." My father wanted the truth to outlive him. I intend to make sure it does. Later that evening, I received a message from an old friend, Caroline, my college roommate. She had seen the headlines. "You always said you'd use the law for good," she wrote. "Looks like you're doing exactly that." I stared at the message for a long time, because that's what this was now. Not about being seen, but about what people see because you refuse to disappear. The next morning, I opened a sealed envelope that had arrived overnight. No sender. Inside a single sheet of paper, typed, anonymous. But I recognized the phrasing. It read, "There was never a plan to honor your father's full wishes, only to preserve the parts that kept them powerful." At the bottom it added, "But power without integrity is just performance." I pinned it to my wall, right next to the trust deed, right below the letter he wrote to me, because those weren't just words anymore, they were direction, and I had allies now, not just in the courtroom, but in the shadows that had once tried to swallow me whole. They didn't come at me with lawyers, they came at me with legacy, which in my family was far more lethal. The first shot was subtle. A statement released by the Rhodes Family Foundation signed by Paige and Scott expressing deep disappointment at the recent attempts to undermine the integrity of our father's final wishes. It didn't name me. It didn't have to. The message was clear: I was rewriting history, not protecting it. Then came the interview. My mother, never one for cameras, appeared on a primetime legal segment, perfectly styled, perfectly poised. She looked into the lens with eyes full of regret. "Lionel adored all his children," she said. "But Natalie," she distanced herself. "She made choices we couldn't support." The host asked if she believed I deserved the trust. My mother didn't hesitate. "I believe Lionel changed his will for a reason, and I believe some things are better left in the past." The ripple was immediate. Headlines shifted tone. From "Daughter reclaims her place in legal legacy" to "estranged heir or ambitious attorney." The insinuation wasn't loud. It was corrosive. Whispers of motive, doubts about authenticity. Stories resurrected from college, law school, old relationships, anything that could be bent into a weapon. And behind it all, I could feel the cold fingers of a public narrative being rewritten in real time, the same way my family had rewritten me. Marta called. "They've retained a crisis PR firm," she said. "They're not fighting the law. They're fighting your name." I stared at the screen in silence. "They're doing what they've always done," I murmured, making me small enough to erase. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. Instead, I made a decision. If they wanted a war of optics, I'd give them something they couldn't spin. I scheduled a press conference, not with cameras and spin doctors, just one podium, one room, one voice. Mine. I stood behind the mic with the letter my father wrote in one hand and the trust deed in the other. "I am not here to dismantle a family," I said. "I am here to protect the truth that family once claimed to stand for." I read his words aloud. The real ones, the private ones, the ones not meant for press releases or posthumous manipulation. "I left you something, not money, something more powerful, something only you can wield." I let the room go quiet, let it sink. This isn't about inheritance, it's about intention. And I intend to honor my father even if it means standing against those who carry his name. I looked straight into the cameras, and I will not be erased. Afterward, I expected silence, or more slander, but what came instead was something else. Letters, emails, comments from strangers. A woman from Ohio. "They did this to me too. Rewrote the will when my mother was sick. You're not alone." A man from Texas. "Your courage gave me the strength to contest my father's trust." Thank you. Even a retired attorney wrote. "The Redford clause hasn't been cited in 20 years. You made it matter again." Of course my family wasn't done. Scott filed a motion to suppress the new witness testimonies claiming bias, coercion, and irrelevance. Page followed up with a motion to question the mental fitness of our father in the final weeks. They were reaching, grasping at the edges of control, but they were losing ground. Because now, I wasn't the only one watching. Then came the subpoena. Marta's voice was razor sharp. "They just demanded your entire case file. From your firm, your bar exams, your employment records, everything. They want to discredit me," I said. She nodded. "And they're terrified of you." That night, I sat alone in my apartment, letter still folded on the table, trust file half read. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from restraint. Because the old me, the one who begged for a seat, who softened herself to stay in the photo frame, she would have backed down. But that woman was gone. They buried her in the margins. This version of me. She rewrites the page. The next day, I filed a counter motion. It included all supporting evidence, all new testimonies, all suppressed files, and one handwritten addendum from Judge Parrish. As a jurist of 40 years, I affirm the intent behind this trust is clear, consistent, and honorable. Anyone working to suppress it is doing so in contradiction to legal ethics and the decedent's wishes. They wanted me to vanish. Instead, I was becoming undeniable, not because of noise, but because of truth. And truth, when held long enough, becomes a sword. The courtroom smelled like pine polish and power. It was a special session, rare, high profile, the kind judges don't assign lightly. The matter of Rhodes v. Rhodes Foundation had made its way into the national probate docket due to its potential precedent on posthumous trust rights. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every person who'd ever been cut out because they refused to stay small. Cameras were prohibited, but the media overflowed outside the courthouse. A crowd had gathered, some legal spectators, some strangers holding signs. One read, "Truth doesn't need permission." Another, "She's not after the money. She is the legacy." Inside the room was colder, clean, sharp, unforgiving. Judge Reynolds presided, stoic, methodical, known for her intolerance of theatrics. Marta stood beside me. Across the aisle, Paige Scott and their litigator, Slick Expensive, detached. The hearing began. Today we review the contested execution and suppression of the Rhodes Fellowship Trust, Judge Reynolds said. We'll hear arguments for and against its validity, with emphasis on testimonial integrity, documentary evidence, and intent of the deceased. I took a breath. This was it. Marta opened with precision. She laid out the timeline, how my father began planning the trust, how the Redford Clause allowed for special executorship in case of improper tampering, how key documents were found in his private study verified by handwriting experts. She submitted the original draft will, the handwritten letter, the strategy memo from Page and Denholm, the trust file and signed formation, and 6 sworn statements from witnesses including a judge, 2 staffers, and his former clerk. Each piece landed like a hammer. Across the room I watched Page's face crack in tiny ways, her chin stiff, lips tight, the mask slipping. Then it was their turn. Their attorney stood. Polished, calm. Your Honor. My clients contend that while Ms. Rhodes may have uncovered various drafts and private letters, none of these documents carry formal legal weight. The will was executed in proper form. Her involvement, while emotionally compelling, is legally void. He turned slightly as if speaking to an imaginary jury. We are not questioning Ms. Rhodes's character. We are questioning the process. And the law requires more than sentiment, it requires structure. Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Is it your position that the decedent's intent is irrelevant if not formally filed? He hesitated. I'm saying, intent must be verified by action, and in this case, the action was incomplete. Marta stood immediately, and yet incomplete only because the people in this room actively worked to stop it. She turned to the judge. We're not here on sentiment. We're here on suppression. Then it was my turn to speak. I stepped forward. Heart steady. Hands still. Your Honor. I began. My father raised me to believe that law was not a shield for the powerful, but a mirror to the truth. I held up his letter. This is not hearsay. This is not wishful thinking. This is a signed, dated expression of intent, supported by drafts, digital records, and witness testimony. I paused. When someone rewrites history, they're not just stealing from the living. They're robbing the dead of the truth they left behind. I looked at Page, at Scott. I don't want their wealth. I don't want their seats. I want what my father tried to give me before they silenced him, a chance to do something with his name that actually meant something. The judge didn't respond right away. She flipped through the documents again. The courtroom was dead quiet. Then she said, I'd like to call an unscheduled witness. Denholm, the former estate counsel. Gasps rippled. Page's face turned to stone. Denholm was escorted in subpoenaed days prior under sealed motion. He looked tired, pale. He took the stand and swore in. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. Mr. Denholm, were you aware of the existence of an amended trust formation signed by Mr. Rhodes? He hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Did you suppress its inclusion in the final estate process? Another pause. Yes. Gasps again. And why? He exhaled. I was under pressure from the family. They told me he was declining. They convinced me she didn't want anything, that she wouldn't fight. He stopped. Then I regret it. Deeply. The gavel came down. This court finds substantial evidence that the Rhodes Fellowship Trust was formed with clear intent, and that its suppression constitutes undue influence and ethical breach. She turned to me. Ms. Rhodes, as per the Redford Clause and legal precedents established today, you are hereby recognized as the lawful executor of the Rhodes Fellowship Trust, with full rights to its assets and naming legacy. The room didn't erupt. There were no cheers, no clapping, just stillness. Then Marta whispered beside me, You did it. But I didn't smile. Not out of bitterness, just awe. Because in that moment something returned to me. Not money, not power, voice. And no one was ever going to take it again. Justice doesn't shout. It whispers, like the sound of a gavel against oak, like the silence of a courtroom when the truth finally lands. 3 weeks after the hearing, Paige resigned from the board of the Rhodes Foundation. The press release called it a personal choice to focus on her family, but we both knew better. Donors had begun pulling out. Sponsors paused their contributions. One even issued a public letter saying the Rhodes name means something again because of Natalie, not despite her. It was the first time I'd seen my name next to legacy, without an asterisk. Scott Ever, the strategist, tried to pivot. He approached me, sent an email through a third party asking for a private meeting. "I think we should talk," he wrote. "There's an opportunity here for unity." Unity, that word. Like an old coat he dusted off when convenient. I didn't reply. Not because I was cruel, because I was done explaining myself to people who only listened when they had something to lose. Denholm was formally disbarred 2 months later. Ethics violations, suppression of legal documents, collusion with beneficiaries for personal gain. He issued a statement of remorse and reflection, but the truth was clear. He didn't fall because I pushed. He fell because he thought no one was watching, and I watched. All of us did. As for my mother, she never spoke to me again. Not after the ruling, not after the press, not after the unveiling of the trust's new headquarters. But she sent me something. It arrived in a small black box. No card, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting. Inside a gold bracelet, my name engraved next to a single word. Still. Still what? Still hers. Still unworthy. Still standing, I didn't need to know. I placed it in the drawer beside my father's letter. The fallout wasn't nuclear, it was surgical. Positions lost, names removed, faces no longer invited to galas or speaking panels. But none of it was vengeance. It was alignment. A return to truth. Sometimes justice isn't a roar, it's a rebalancing. A slow, inevitable tipping back toward center. And when it happens, the ones who clung hardest to the lie fall the hardest. Not because they were evil, but because they thought they were untouchable. People ask me sometimes, did it feel good winning? Being recognized? Getting back what was stolen? And I always answer honestly, it didn't feel good. It felt right. There's a difference. Good is revenge. Right is restoration. Months passed. I used the trust to launch a legal education program for women from underserved communities, named after my father, but built in my own image. And this time, the mission wasn't just printed in brochures. It was lived. By every fellow, every attorney, every client. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Marta stood beside me, hand on my shoulder. "You rewrote the story," she whispered. I smiled. "No," I said. "I just turned the page." And when the camera lights faded, the speeches ended and the applause fell away. I stood alone in the hallway of the new building. There, hung on the wall, was a single photograph. Black and white. Grainy, but unmistakable. Me at 19, standing in front of a courthouse holding my first case file. Eyes wide, spine straight, mouth set like I already knew how hard the fight would be. I reached out and touched the frame gently. She didn't know everything I know now, but she knew enough. She knew she belonged, even when they said she didn't. Especially then. They invited me to speak, not at a courtroom, not at a press conference, but at the National Bar Association's annual summit, a room once reserved for the men whose portraits used to hang over my father's study. The letter read, "We honor your commitment to truth, integrity, and the law's original purpose to protect, not preserve. Your story has inspired a generation of legal professionals." I sat with the invitation for 3 days, not because I was unsure, but because the little girl in me who once sat at the corner of the family table waiting to be noticed was stunned silent. I wore navy, the same color I wore in the photo my father carried in his briefcase. As I walked onto the stage, applause met me, not loud but sustained, the kind that isn't for fame, but for proof. Proof that staying quiet, holding steady, and telling the truth without rage, without theatrics, still meant something. I took the podium, paused, then began. There are many kinds of legacy. There's the kind you inherit, the kind you build, and then there's the kind you defend when everyone else forgets it ever existed. I scanned the room. When I was written out of my father's will, I thought I'd been erased. But what I learned is that being removed from a document doesn't mean you've been removed from your purpose. Legacy isn't marble plaques or trust funds. It's what survives the edits. It's what you keep alive when you're the only one who remembers why it mattered. I told them about the Redford clause, about the documents, the letter, the trial, the people who stood beside me. I didn't name names out of spite. I didn't need to. They weren't the story anymore. I was. After the speech, a young law student came up to me. She was trembling. My father said women don't belong in litigation, she said. But you stood up there like you built the courtroom. I smiled softly. Maybe I did, I said. Just brick by brick. She hugged me, and in that moment I felt something shift. Not in me, in history. Weeks later, I stood in front of the building that now bore my name, the Natalie Rhodes Center for Justice and Legal Equity, carved in marble beneath my father's quote, "The law must never become so familiar that we forget its power to do good." I'd written it there myself, because for all his failings, for all the silence he had left behind the blueprint, and I chose to follow it even when they told me I couldn't, especially then. My photo now hangs beside his, not to match, but to remind. That legacy isn't passed down, it's earned. And once it's earned, no one gets to take it from you, not even family. So when they ask me today, "Are you the daughter who won the will case?" I smile. No, I say. I'm the attorney who carried the truth long enough to make it matter. Then I walk away. Still, undefeated, and no longer invisible.